At the end of this video, you'll be able to, number one, tally all survey sections, 2, calculate the number of respondents in the high, medium, or low groups, and 3, you'll be able to use these survey results to better understand how your audience will receive your message. So let's begin. Before you actually start analyzing the survey data, you need to complete a number of prerequisite steps. So this video assumes that you've already created and administered your audience analysis survey. We also are assuming that you collected results from that survey. In other words, you handed it out to people and they answered your survey. And finally, that you have printed out all completed surveys. So if you look at my example, this was an example of a completed survey that I administered and collected data on. And so you should have all yours printed out, just like I have here, before beginning the video. Now, something that you want to note that are going to be different between the survey I created and the example I will be using in comparison to the instruments that you have created. First of all, my attitudinal section likely will be longer than yours. So in other words, I have 35 statements and you will have at least 10, but the likelihood that you have 35 statements is probably slim. Also, your survey is more likely to be a one-page instrument rather than 3 pages like mine. So with that said, let's begin with step 1, which is placing numbers on each survey. Let me demonstrate this step for you. Okay, notice that I have all the surveys printed out. And now in order to keep track of all the surveys, so let's say you had 25 surveys, you're going to put numbers on the top of each survey. So you have first respondent number 1, second respondent number 2, then you go on to the next survey respondent, which will be number 3, and so forth until you get to the end of number 25. So each of your surveys should have numbers on it. So now you're ready to go on to step 2, which is to tally up section 1, or if section 1 isn't your self-efficacy instrument, then you want to focus on the self-efficacy section of your survey. And in order to tally up the self-efficacy section, all you are going to do is add the numbers within that section. So in my survey, I had 6 statements, and if you add up each of the 6 statements, you will see that I get a total. In this example, the total equals 19. So if you added up 5, 4, 3, 3, 2, and 2, that equals 19. And you're going to do that for each of your respondents for each self-efficacy item. So now that you have tallied up each respondent's total for their self-efficacy section within your survey, you're now ready to determine where the respondents as a whole fall on your self-efficacy scale. Remember, your whole goal is to try to understand your audience, and so you want to understand how confident they are in carrying out the particular behaviors that you are going to be persuading them on. So in order to determine whether they fall into a high, medium, or low category, you need to calculate some ranges to determine who is in the high category, who is going to be in the low category, and those are the people who are probably going to be a little less interested in your message, and then you're also going to have a medium category. So if you look at my instrument, you see that once again I have 6 statements. And so if I look at the statements in comparison to my scale and I go from 1 to 5, clearly the people who are answering at a 4 or a 5 for each question are going to be falling in the high category, whereas the people who are answering 3s are going to be in the medium group and people who are answering 2s and 1s are going to be in the low group. So let's see how that plays out. So if you actually take 4 times 6, because there's 6 statements, you get a total of 24. So we're going to create our first range at the benchmark of 24. So those respondents who received a total score of 24 or higher on the self-efficacy portion of your overall instrument, if they received a 24 or higher, then we're going to put them in the high self-efficacy group. in comparison to those who are answer the majority of threes, if we multiply 3 times 6, that's a total score of 18. So those people whose total score ranges from 18 to 23, and the reason it's 23 is it's one less. Remember, our high group was 24. In our medium group, it's going to be 23 all the way down to 18. Any respondent who scores from 18 to 23 will be considered medium in their self-efficacy behavior. And then finally, the low group is just anyone who scores less than 18. Because remember, our cutoff for the medium group went to 18. So those are our 3 groups. And now what you're going to have to do is go back and look at each of your respondents' score and place them in a group. So let me go ahead and demonstrate what I mean. If you look at my instruments, I marked their total for the self-efficacy section, and then I indicated high, medium, or low group. And then after doing so, then I started tallying. So here are just 3 examples. You're going to do all your respondents, but you can see. So after you've tallied them, then you determine what group they fall in based on the ranges you set, and then you give a tally. So at the end of it, you'll know who is in the high, medium, and low groups for self-efficacy. Step 4 is to tally the subjective norms section of your survey. So go to your survey and find the subjective norms section, and then for each respondent, just like you did for the self-efficacy instrument, you're going to tally the responses. So here's an example of a completed section of subjective norms, and you can see that I added all the numbers and I got 20. So you're going to do that for every instrument that you have, and you're going to add everything up, just like you did with the self-efficacy section, but this time it's going to be subjective norms. Tally, come up with a total for each respondent's answers for each section of subjective norms, and make sure that you do that for every respondent who completed a survey. Just like so. Step 5, you're going to determine where respondents fall on the subjective norms scale. So similar to what you did with the self-efficacy section, where you determined if they were in high, medium, or low groups, and then you tallied the collective results, you're going to do a similar process with subjective norms. Now notice that my subjective norms section had 6 statements. Therefore, I'm using the same range that I used for the self-efficacy section, because it too had 6 statements. If you look at the scale runs from 5 to 1. So depending on the number of statements you have will determine your range, just like it did with self-efficacy. So if you had 8 statements, for example, within your subjective norms, then in order to figure out your range, you need to do the same process that we did with self-efficacy. So in this case, let's say we had 8 statements under subjective norms. Then you would take the 8 statements and multiply it by 4, because remember in the scale of 5 to 1, if respondents are selecting 4s and 5s, that means that they're going to be in the high group. So in order to determine what that range is of the high group, we would take 4 and multiply it by the 8 statements, which gets us the number 32. So we know for the high group range that anyone who scores a total score of 32 or greater for subjective norms would be considered in the high group. Now, if you were going to figure out what the medium group would be for 8 statements, then remember, the medium group, those people are usually scoring 3s for each statement. So we took 3 times 8, and that gives us 24, and then that would give us a range between 24 and 31. Remember, 31 is the end result because it's 1 less than the high group, which was 32 or greater. And then to get to the low group, we just go 1 less than the medium group range of 24, so we'd go totals less than 23 would be the low group. So you need to make sure that you figure out your high, medium, and low groups based on the number of statements that are in your section. So once you do that, go ahead and indicate who's in the high, medium, and low group, and then do a collective tally so you know the number of respondents that are in the high, medium, and low group for subjective norms. For step 6, we're going to jump to the demographic section. We're going to put the attitudinal section on hold for the last thing to do because that one's a little bit different. So we're going to go to the demographic section because really with the demographic section it's similar to what you've been doing in that you're going to have to tally the responses. So in your demographic section, you have asked your respondents certain questions. Typically, they're usually circling their answers. So in my example, I had employment. Are you full-time, part-time, unemployed? How important is dressing well? I have very, somewhat, not at all. So I need to tally the respondents' answers because I'm looking for the mean scores of the overall collective responses. So in order to do that, what I did was I took my original section and I enlarged it in Word because I'm going to have to hand tally each response. So what I did was I enlarged it here, as you can see on the screen, and then what I went ahead and did was I'm going to use the enlarged version. I printed it out because now I'm going to look at each survey response and I'm going to mark it as a tally. So this respondent indicated full-time, so I marked that. They indicated that dressing well was somewhat important, so I'm tallying that. So I'm marking each response because remember I'm looking to get an average of the collective response. So after I do the first respondent, then I go on to the second respondent and I do the same thing. And so this person too indicated that they were a full-time employed, so I give that another tally there, another notch. They said somewhat, so I give that another notch. I give the amount that they spent on the clothing, and I keep recording the answers from each respondent. I'm going to do that for all respondents and all the answers that they have given me until I get the collective tally of the group, so that at the end of this process I should have gone through everyone and I'll have on my sheet the final results, just like I did with self-efficacy and subjective norms. The only difference is here I have nominal data. I don't have any scale, so I have to put the little marks in my category so I know how to add everything up. So go ahead and do that for your demographic section so that you know that what the answers and the collective responses will be for the entire group, so that you get a feel for your audience that you're going to actually present to. So go ahead and do that. Step 7 focuses on the attitudinal section of your instrument. Now the attitudinal section is going to be different than what you've done with self-efficacy and subjective norms. If you recall, when you created the attitudinal instrument, you had to create statements that were both positive and negative. In contrast, when you created the self-efficacy instrument and the subjective norms instrument, those statements were written in the neutral. Because they're written in the neutral, you don't have to recode the answers. However, with attitudinal instruments, because you have positive and negative statements, you actually have to recode the negative statements in order that your attitudinal instrument accurately measures those that have high attitudes and those that have low attitudes. So let me show you some examples so you can understand why we have to recode. So if you look on the screen, you'll see that here's an instrument that was answered by someone who has a positive attitude toward buying clothes at a resale shop. And in this case, I'm using in this example 6 items. And you'll see that items 2, items 5, and item 6 are the negative items, and the remaining items are positive. So we have a balance of positive and negative items. So when this person who has high attitude answered the instrument, clearly those positive items, they scored high, and the negative items, they scored low. But remember, we're trying to distinguish between those who have high attitude and those who have low attitude. So we need those people who have high attitudes to be scoring, their total score needs to be high so that it reflects that they have high attitudes. If we don't recode the negative items, we see here that their total score is 20. But if you compare it to this next example, if we actually recode the negative items, and you can see here I highlighted in yellow the negative items, and we changed the answer of 2 to a 4, and for statement number 5 we changed the answer of 1 to a 5, and for answer 6 we changed the 2 to the 4. We flip the numbers and you can see that the total score went up to 28. That's really their true score because they have positive attitude. So technically, the fact that they scored resale shops aren't clean, which is statement number 2 as a 2, is really a 4 because they have positive attitude. They're saying, yeah, I don't believe that the resale shops aren't clean. I believe actually the opposite. In comparison to someone who has negative attitude toward buying clothes at a resale shop, here we see the answers of a negative person before the instrument is recoded, and we see their total score is a 16. But if we look after we recode the negative items, and notice that once again we flip-flop the answers, so the 4 becomes 2, the 5 becomes 1, the 4 becomes 2, and their true total score is actually an 8. They have low attitude about buying clothes at a resale shop. So the recoding, when you have to, in order to recode, you have to first know which items on your attitudinal instrument are the negative items. So you want to go ahead and print out an original attitudinal instrument that you have and mark down each negative item with an N so that you know when you go back to recode your respondents' answers, you know which ones you have to recode. So let's review this one more time. When it comes to recoding, you're going to change only the negative statements, the items that your respondents circled for the negative statements only. You're going to change 5s into 1s, 4s into 2s, a circled 2 becomes a 4, and a circled 1 becomes a 5. You leave the 3s alone. You don't have to touch them. So you can see in my demonstration here, I listed the N's by the negative statements. Then I actually made a list for myself. These are the numbers on my instrument that need to be recoded, so that when I go ahead and look at each individual survey, I can go, okay, 2's first, so I'm going to recode that item. Oh, I didn't have to because it's a 3. So now I go to my next negative statement. That item is a 2, so I'm going to change it into a 4. I go to my next negative item. That one was circled a 2, so I changed that to a 4. I go to my next negative statement. The respondent circled a 1. I change it to a 5. I go to the next negative item. They circled a 1. I change it to a 5. I find my next negative statement. They circled a 1. I change it to a 5. And I keep going. I find each negative item and I recode what the respondent said to the appropriate change. So there it was a 2, I changed it to a 4. The other one was a 1, I changed it to a 5. Here again we have someone that circled a 1, so I'm recoding it to a 5. I go to the next negative item and I continue going down my attitudinal instrument until I recode all of the negative items, and I'm going to do that for each respondent survey that I have. So after you recode all of your respondents' surveys, you're ready to tally up the attitudinal section for each of your respondents. And to do that, you're just going to do like you did with the other sections. You're going to start adding up each of all the circled items, including the ones that you had recoded. Make sure you count the new recode, not the old circle, just as I'm showing here. You're going to add everything up, and then you're going to get a total score. And you're going to do that for each of your surveys, just like you did with self-efficacy and subjective norms. For step 9, you're going to determine where the respondents fall on the attitudinal scale. So just like you've done before for subjective norms and self-efficacy, you need to create ranges. So remember, you need to review your scale, and you need to review the number of items that you have to determine your range. So let's say in the example I have on the screen, I have 10 items, and my scale goes from 5 to 1. So to determine the range for high attitude, remember, people who are circling 4s and 5s for each item are going to be considered people with high attitudes. So I take a 4 and I multiply it by 10 statements, and that's going to give me a total of 40. So my range, anyone who scores 40 or greater is going to be considered someone with high attitude. People who are mostly circling 3s for each statement, they're going to be in the medium group. So since I have 10 statements, I go 3 times 10, and that's 30. So the range for the medium attitude starts at 30 and goes up to 39. Remember, 39 is one less than 40 because that's our cutoff from the high to medium group. And then lastly, we have anything less than 30, which is 29 or less, they're going to be considered low attitude. Now remember, in this example, I have 10 statements. You have to go by the number of statements you have. Your scale is going to be the same. You're using a 5 to 1 scale. So just like in all these examples, your high group will be multiplied by 4. And then you'll have your 3s, and then everything under that will be the low groups. But you need to make sure that you are multiplying by the appropriate number of statements that you have in your instrument. Otherwise, if you have 12 statements and you're multiplying by 10, then your ranges are going to be off. After you figure out your ranges, then you go back to each respondent's survey and you look at their totals and you write down, just like you did for self-efficacy and subjective norms, whether they fall in the high, medium, or low group. And then finally, you tally everyone's results. So you can see your collective audience as a whole to determine, do you have mostly high attitude people, or are they in the medium group, or are they in the low group? At this point, you should have your overall tallies for each instrument section in front of you. These tallies show if your audience possesses high, medium, or low attitudes, high, medium, or low self-efficacy, and subjective norms for your behavior of focus. Now remember, these instruments are based off of the theory of reasoned action and the theory of planned behavior. If you don't recall what these theories are all about, then go ahead and review the videos that you were supposed to watch earlier in this semester in regards to the two models. If you recall, both models predict whether someone will carry out a specific behavior, and the predictor variables are attitude, self-efficacy, and subjective norms. For example, those respondents who possess high attitude, efficacy, and support for buying clothes at a resale shop are more likely to shop resale in comparison to those with low attitudes, efficacy, and subjective norms. In other words, there's a positive correlation between these variables and the behavior of focus. As attitude goes up, for example, behavior goes up. Likewise, if self-efficacy goes down, then behavior goes down. Typically, although not always, self-efficacy, attitude, and subjective norms are correlated. In other words, when self-efficacy goes up, so too does attitude and subjective norms. However, there are times when we may see high self-efficacy, for example, but poor attitude. To illustrate this, let's say I have an audience member or a number of audience members who are confident in shopping at resale stores. They all have high self-efficacy. In other words, they have the knowledge and the skills to find themselves fashionable outfits at great prices. But their attitudes about buying clothing at resale shops are low, because they either don't like secondhand clothing, or some of them feel that resale clothing is beneath them, or perhaps resale clothing is not part of their lifestyle brands. Thus, we would see them having high self-efficacy scores but low attitudinal scores. With this type of audience, I may elect to tailor my message using tactics created for hostile audiences. In this case, I want to persuade my audience to buy clothing at resale shops, but my audience disagrees with my message and will likely be unreceptive to what I have to say. Therefore, I may have to introduce humor to diffuse some of their hostility towards what I have to say, or I may need to find common ground with my audience, such as everyone wishes to save money and look good, so that might be my common ground before trying to persuade them to purchase their clothing at resale shops. Another strategy I may use for a hostile audience is to refute the audience's negative attitudes toward the topic. Now, to pinpoint the strongest hot-button topics, you may need to go back to your attitudinal section on your survey and look to see which items scored the lowest. For example, I may discover that the 2 items within my attitudinal section of my survey that are influencing the attitudinal scores of the group as a whole towards the lower end are due to these 2 items. As you see on the screen, those audience members who feel unfavorable towards buying clothes at resale shops do not believe that there are high-end items to be found, and they prefer to shop at regular stores. By uncovering this, I can counter these arguments in order to reduce the resistance. For example, I might dress in one of my high-end outfits that I purchased at a resale store. Let's say I found some Tahari pants, a Louis Vuitton scarf, and a Calvin Klein t-shirt in good condition. I showcase my ensemble to my audience and ask them for comments on it. I may ask them if they can name the designers, how much I paid, and where I bought each item. After collecting their comments, I then tell them that everything was purchased at a resale shop for less than $40. Most of the skeptics in the audience will begin to lower their guard. I may continue to showcase some more outfits and accessories that I found with high names and low prices in order to continue to lower the audience's resistance toward my message. Next, I would transition from these illustrations and counter the next belief my audience has, which is that buying clothing at regular stores is better than shopping resale. In other words, I have to overcome this attitude before calling them to action, which is to shop at resale stores. If you want more information about dealing with hostile audiences, then review the class textbook chapter on preparing persuasive communication, where they talk about dealing with hostile audiences in order to persuade more effectively. The textbook authors also talk about apathetic audiences. You'll know if your audiences are indifferent to what you have to say if the majority of your tallies from your self-efficacy, subjective norms, and attitudinal sections of your survey are in the medium groups. These are the people circling the 3 for most of their answers. They are neutral. In order to discover more information about the neutral respondents, you may need to compare their neutral attitudes with their demographic information. For example, if I discover that most of my audience answered the question, how important is dressing well, and the majority responded somewhat or not at all, then they may not see the value in dressing well. In order to move them out of their apathy, I may have to first show them research findings that emphasize the impact on how one dresses to job success, dating satisfaction, and general well-being. Further, I may reference studies that found those who dress well earn 3 times more than those who do not. I may even show them pictures of well-dressed people and ask them to shout out what characteristics they think these people possess, and then show them pictures of not so well-dressed people and ask them the same questions. Once I have their attention that dressing well is vital for success in life, next I would develop my message that focuses on using resale shops to achieve a well-styled wardrobe. To successfully raise my audience's knowledge and skills in shopping at resale shops, I would return to my self-efficacy section results and see what statements received lower than average scores. For example, let's say the 2 efficacy items that scored the lowest on my survey We're evaluating merchandise at resale shops to see if it fits my style, and efficiently maneuvering through resale shop aisles in order to build an outfit. With this information at hand, which is based on my audience's completed survey answers, I can build a message that helps them enhance their knowledge and skills in these areas. I want to build their knowledge before calling them to action, that is, to buy clothing at resale shops. If I call them to action before moving the apathetic audience out of their indifference, then I will be less effective persuading them to my appeals. So again, to learn more about addressing the apathetic audiences, go ahead and return to your textbook chapter on preparing persuasive communication. When you review this chapter again, you will also see a third type of audience, that is a motivated audience. Here the audience has positive attitude towards your message. Thus, if you review your overall tallies from your survey, which includes all sections, that's your attitudinal section, your self-efficacy section, and your subjective norms section, then you'll see that the majority of respondents fell into your high groups. That is, you'll know that you have a motivated audience. Audiences that are highly motivated are typically processing information centrally. That is, they're using central route processing and not peripheral route processing. Remember, in central route processing, the audience is focused on the strengths of your message. You want to use facts and logical arguments with this group. Even though you know this group is highly motivated and values your message, you want to still strengthen their beliefs with your persuasive communication. To do so, go back again through each section of your survey and find out what items are scoring lower than the others so you can build and reinforce your message around those areas. For example, let's say that the lowest average statement on my attitudinal instrument was coming from this item. Shopping a resale store takes too much time to comb through all the clothing racks to find something decent. I may use facts in the way of statistics to show that shopping at a regular store takes just as long as shopping at a resale shop. Additionally, I may offer a few tips on how to cut down the time spent combing through the resale shop in order to build on my audience's already high knowledge and attitudes by strengthening their behaviors. Another strategy to strengthen an already highly motivated and knowledgeable audience is to show your appreciation for them by validating their behaviors. For example, I may commend them for buying their clothes at resale shops because they are helping the environment from additional clothing being placed in landfills. I may tell them how great they are for shopping resale because the proceeds from many resale shops are helping nonprofit organizations that help their communities. Another strategy to reinforce similarities between you and your highly motivated audience may be found within your subjective norms section. If you discover that highly motivated people are only getting support to buy their clothing at resale shops from their best friends, for example, then you may build this fact into your message. At the same time, you may suggest that you, the audience, the best friends, know something about buying clothes at resale shops that our parents, colleagues, and siblings do not. Buying clothes from resale shops is life-changing because you save money, you look good, and you have clothing for every type of event. In other words, you are using the findings from the subjective norms section to create an appeal of being a part of a special group. The goal is to reinforce membership in the special group and persuade your audience to continue to buy resale. Once again, if you return to your textbook chapter, you'll discover more strategies on how to develop a persuasive message for highly motivated audiences. Lastly, you may find mixed results from your audience analysis, which would indicate that you will be presenting a message in front of a mixed audience. In other words, if your instrument was given to 15 people and 5 people are in the high attitude, efficacy, and subjective norms group, and another 5 are in the medium group, and the last 5 are in the low group, then you have a mixed audience. The textbook author discusses a few strategies on how to deal with mixed audiences. Go back and read those strategies and then determine how you wish to proceed. Once you analyze a plan, then you can incorporate some of the strategies discussed for each of the three groups, that is hostile, apathetic, and motivated. You may also want to consider how to build central route processing and peripheral route processing into your message based on your audience analysis. Lastly, don't forget to analyze how other persuasive communication techniques that you learned earlier in this semester may be useful for your message. For example, if you are reading the book Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion, then you could find useful tools to incorporate into your persuasive message that relates to the type of audience you will be presenting to. Further, return to videos such as The Science of Persuasion to see if any of those techniques can aid you in preparing your persuasive message based on the audience analysis results. With that said, begin analyzing your audience by reflecting on the tallies you calculated from your audience analysis instruments so that you'll be prepared to create a more effective persuasive message.